Welcome to the Media Roundtable, everyone. We are going to have a very, very special look back episode today because it has been quite a year in 2024. We've been doing this show almost every other week. So this is we've done about 25 of them this year where we're really just unpacking news and information about what's been going on in the audio industry, usually anchored around podcasting, whether you consider that audio or video. But really talking about what does it mean for the chief audio officer, that marketer who's responsible for showing positive returns on their investment in the channel. And from that, we tend to have, a really interesting conversation about not just what has happened, but what are the implications to those of us that work in the business of monetization of sound as an entertainment platform. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO and founder of Oxford Road, also CEO and not founder of Veritone One. As we're going to be touching on over the course of the conversation, part of our big news this year is the bringing together of these two agencies. And as a result of that, we're starting to have a bit of a blended family, not just in how we do business, but also how we approach this show. And so we have some Oxford Road old timers with us today who are going to help in looking back at the top stories of 2024. And we also have at least one of our new partners from the Veritone One side, and that is Conor Doyle. So first things first, welcome to the show, Conor. Glad to have you back with us.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Haircut for all those who are watching on video. It's like
Was that?
a little bit. Did we cut the hair down a little bit for this episode? Did you get
I
spruced?
did. We're going on vacation and it's hot here. I'm in Sydney, Australia, and so I got a little haircut last week. Just keep things tight, you know.
Yeah. It's hot in California right now too. We're having like 80-degree plus days around, and we're running into Christmas, which makes me wonder, where is it still cold? But anyway, glad to have you here, Conor, ready to get into this stuff with you. We have James Ingrassia, who is EVP of Client Service at Oxford Road. Welcome, James. Glad to have you with us.
Thanks. Happy to be back.
And no haircut on the James front, from what I can see. We have Stu Redwine, head of creative at Oxford Road. Stu, it's a pleasure to have you taking a break from Ad Infinitum and joining us here on the classic version of the program.
I love to be here. I got a haircut right before Thanksgiving.
You did.
Yeah.
Well, it was fabulous. I remember it well. And Miranda, grateful to have you as always, head of media at Oxford Road.
Honored to be included. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And then finally, Neal Lucey. Neal, I don't know if this is one of the episodes you're trying to get out of, but we got him to show up. He plays hard to get with us, but we have him because he always throws bullseyes when we get him to talk. So this is always a positive time in our week when Neal joins us for these discussions. Neal, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm slightly offended to be called an old timer, but
that's Are you? Well, I don't know. Can you be an old timer of 4 years? All right, you're a bit of
Oxford.
You're a bit of a newbie. Yeah, but we do this in dog years. So
exactly.
Like, technically speaking, you are a little long in the tooth with us here, because our years, I think, take longer than the average year.
No question.
But anyway, listen. Enough about us. Let's talk about the business, shall we? We're going to cover a lot today: AI and tech in audio. We're going to talk about ad load. There's been some changes there. We're going to talk about the global expansion of the business. We're going to talk about what happened with all these big money deals. Are they coming? Are they going? Are they happening again? The podcast election, and I think the correlated implications on brand safety we're going to talk about. We'll try not to get too far into the what's a podcast conversation, but it seems to be creeping up everywhere, particularly as we talk about the rise of video. And that's going to be something that we definitely have some conversation on. So why don't we start with the thing that everybody's always talking about all the time. And I'm going to ask Stu to set us a little bit and give us a little bit of a year in review in regards to AI and technology and audio.
Happy to, yes. AI in audio. You can't spell the word audio without the letters A and I. So it's a long time coming. This has been a very, very busy year when it comes to AI and audio. from personalized ads are proven to drive brand favorability is stuff that we're seeing. I think the most interesting thing is all of the AI studios that you're seeing pop up, like Adthos and Wondercraft. We work with both of those where just look at like everybody got their Spotify Wrapped. There's a AI voiced podcast you can listen to that takes you through your Spotify Wrapped with two different clone voice hosts. So it's been a tremendous year for that. And with that also comes in the concerns that everybody's had since the beginning, but as it's getting more active and more real, there's the ethical concerns when it comes to cloning the voices, and then also regulatory concerns. We've seen Tennessee this year had a regulatory effort in banning voice cloning that people have not given permission for, and the unions making demands, making an agreement when it comes to clone voices. I remember earlier this year, we had a campaign where we even had it very narrowly defined how we were going to be cloning an individual's voice, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. But it's here, and it's not changing. And the abilities that you now have in even being able to modulate the performance of these voices is truly incredible. So no signs of slowing down whatsoever, and is radically changing audio production for sure. I think the next thing that we're going to see is even more progress when it comes to the music and the sound design. Like the voice things seems like it's done, and it's only going to get increasingly better. The uncanny valley is far behind us with the voices, but the music, figuring out the music rights, having AI do music rights, and then sound design is the next thing. There's some of that and like in Wondercraft Studio, you can go in and ask it, tell it what you want the sound design to be. But I see that's going to develop a lot here in the coming year for sure.
All right. And so for the rest of the group, how are you guys seeing AI make its entrance into the industry as you experience it? Is there anything positive, negative? We talked about a lot of our fears, I think, around this in the past, and how, the collision of just the notion of something that's artificial in a channel that is really, at its core famous for being authentic. And what's that going to do with the proliferation of, artificial capabilities when the audience doesn't necessarily know the difference? Where is that a good thing? Where is that harmful? And are we actually experiencing any of that yet?
I think it's a really interesting and exciting time in that world. Now, I think we had the same point of view last year, right around this time when this probably came up, and now there's a lot more concrete examples to look at. But I think as long as the personal endorsements and the advertising isn't fake in the terms of like the host never even experienced the product, but yet they're sitting there and an AI voice is saying how much they love it, I think we're on safe ground there. And I was listening to a podcast that I normally listen to, and they actually said that they had a recording glitch during an episode, an interview with the guest, and there was like this buzz the entire time. And what they did is they took the transcript, loaded it into a system, which cloned their voices, and the entire podcast was fake, and no one knew at all. Not a single person caught on there. So I think in those types of cases, it's really interesting. In that one, it was their thoughts, it was their transcript. They did say those words out of their mouth, so there's probably a little bit more comfort level with that. But I think that I'm fine with the content like that, but when it comes to advertising, I think that there's still some warning signs to look for.
Yeah, I think on the Veritone One side, it's interesting. We've been kind of leaning into some of this where there's, I think, two areas, Dan, and the authenticity piece is obviously the most important piece because that's how we transact it, for 80% of the advertising that we do. But I think the question is, can we make new content that's engaging, or can production companies make new content via AI, and what is the value of that for advertisers? If a fresh piece of content from a human is valued at a $30 CPM, is an AI piece of content valued at a $5 CPM? And can you extend the life of your show as a creator, kind of similar to what James was talking about, and still bring some ad revenue in? Another area is, how do you use your own library as a creator and use AI as almost like like 1,000 editors to make new content from your content, and what is the value of that to an advertiser? And then I think there's AI ad, generation capabilities as part of that as well, even utilizing talent. So it's sort of a seamless execution for a creator. But I think just making that delineation clear with audience is going to be the crux of how this is perceived in the marketplace by audiences, and all of that I think is a bit of an unknown.
All right, so Conor, let me dig in on what I hear you saying, and tell me if I'm getting it right. So when we talk about AI's impact, and we're looking at this from an advertising standpoint, the first place we go is like, oh, well, is the endorsement actually going to be by the host, or is it fake? And then we go, all right, well, what's the impact on ad generation? Or, are there implications in how a show is produced? But where I hear you taking it is maybe a step further to say, like, what's the impact on inventory, and how much more inventory might we have now that you can extrapolate from what a host thinks about something? I mean, I will ask AI what I think about brand safety or different topics just based on things I've said publicly. And what's amazing to me is how well it's able to actually capture my voice and points of view and start to generate new content that actually is rooted in things I really think and don't really have problems with it saying. Right. But I hear you saying, like, when you take that to somebody who's a professional host and makes content for a living, now one show could be, how many different Joe Rogan shows could there actually be? How many hours a week of content could be produced just by taking what's already captured and known? And that has implications on our media approach to what there is to buy, what is the value of what we buy. I mean, it seems like this is pretty significant. And I guess my question back to you, Conor, is, am I getting it? And how far along do you think we are in, scratching the surface on what that could actually mean?
Yeah, you're exactly getting it. And I think a real life example of that could be, let's say you're a sports show, and over the last 3 years, you've spoken about Tom Brady at various pieces of the year. Let's say there's some big Tom Brady news, and you want to pull together all your archives of Tom Brady and make a new show fast and get it out, basically. So I think that we are seeing that happening, and we are sponsoring into that. So this is something that I think we're going to see an increased amount of in 2025. Right now, we're beta testing, so we're not paying for any of this, but we're working with some content creators to say, okay, let's make some AI content, let's put an ad on there, and let's see if it, how well it performs relative to, I guess like a standard or human piece of content.
And in terms of like the impact on the market, do you think there's any shift in how much there is to buy? Do you think that there's like let's imagine there's, X number of hours that's being consumed today. Do you think it's quantifiable yet about how much that's getting extended with unoriginal to the host content? Because that'll be an interesting thing to watch, right? As we start to like create new language for what was actually directly produced and what was extrapolated, right?
I think the progression is there's a lot of tools out there that help creators clip their show and promote it on social media, right? In short form bits to get to get audiences or to get people interested in their show. I think what we're seeing the shift is can I use maybe those same tools to make long form content? And I think that's where we're seeing early testing, but I think nothing quantifiable in terms of the value of that for audiences, for creators, for advertisers. I think it's just super early days.
Yeah, please, Miranda.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say if I can jump in too, because like you brought up an interesting point about their using AI to create, more different types of content, longer content. But there's a specific podcast that I listen to, and they use AI to truncate the content. So whereas like a podcast episode is like an hour and a half, it's like, okay, here's a 15-minute episode with like all the important things that you need to know. And oftentimes like I find myself listening to the shorter ad, and if I want more, then I'll go to the longer podcast episode. And so I think it's really interesting how you can creators can use it in many different ways.
Yeah, and one of the things, we've been talking for a long time. Like we went in super early on the dynamic audio capabilities through smart speakers, and I think the prediction we've been making here for a while is that you're going to be able to say, "Oh, I want to hear all of the conversations that Joe Rogan has had with people about aliens." And then his top experts, I want to hear what they have to say in other shows about aliens. And I've got a 28-minute commute, so I needed to fill that time and be done in 27 minutes. And then it goes. And I think that's going to be the type of thing that you can do to have customized in real time as you're like on the fly versus, hey, we're creating 6 extra editions of this show that are kind of pre-programmed, not tailored to the individual. And I imagine these are both going to be taking place, but it's going to be so fascinating because I think 2025, this should probably go into our future predictions, that I think we're going to start seeing where the publishers control what that new extrapolated content is. But then there's maybe the Pandora of the future version where we're actually asking it to tailor to our needs. And I think that's the next level. Whether or not we start to see that in 2025, I don't know, but it sure is coming soon.
Well, I think we made it. I think I made a prediction last year that 2024 was going to be the year, but the stuff isn't quite there yet. I think the added layer on this is conversational.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if any of you guys are using Chat GPT's conversational at all, where you're talking to it, but that is an aspect of, there's been so many different visions of the future and what our interfaces are going to be. Like in Minority Report, it's that holographic stuff, right? But that exhausts your arms moving stuff around. But talking, being able to talk to it and it just do it. So it's not even just this static thing is what I'm trying to say of like, it's 28 minutes. It's also as it's going, you go, hey, whatever the things that, Siri, let's say, hey Siri, well, what was that last point? Could you actually give me the last 3 things he said about that in the previous shows? And it'll be real. You'll be talking to it, so it won't be as passive. It'll be active even in an auditory sense. And that's the stuff that I'm super excited about.
I want to pick up with Stu because
Yes.
one is I think I did a really poor job a few podcasts ago trying to represent like your POV on like how we fear new technology and how AI kind of, as people get used to it, will become more comfortable with it and won't fear it. So I wanted you to talk about that. But then the other thing that we were talking a lot about AI for content creation, and I want to just hear from you from the creative standpoint, like how is it affecting kind of what you're doing in creative for our advertisers?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. So one is like, with the technology changing, I mean, 2 big things. Something from behavioral science is a mere exposure effect. And it's that as humans are exposed to anything, not only do we become comfortable with it, we develop an affinity for the thing, right? Which is kind of like you can understand Stockholm syndrome or even stuff that's bad for us. We actually like it because we know it, because we can predict it, because we're a survival mechanism. So the more we're exposed to all the AI stuff and hear the voices, the more we actually don't just get used to it. You like what you are repeatedly exposed to. It's part of your survival mechanism. Okay. So there's that at play. Two, the uncanny valley. That's the big thing in any of the arts, is there's this place that we don't totally understand where something's trying to be human and it's not quite human. And the idea is that our survival mechanisms are reacting almost if it's undead or it's a threat of some kind. Once you pass through that, all of a sudden you got to be on either end of it. Mickey Mouse is on one end, photorealistic is on the other. You don't want to be stuck in the middle like the Beowulf film from a few years ago. So with audio, we were having some of that a couple of years ago, but now it's like it's practically flawless. So those 2 forces combined, as we're exposed to it and we use it and it's useful, and then the fact that the uncanny valley is gone, that's Katie bar the door. It's just, it opens it all up. Now, as far as how do we use it when it comes to creative, what I'm finding more and more and with my peers is it is such a fabulous early tool to do a lot of the work that, all of this creative stuff is idea generation and the combining of ideas together. And another big piece of it is like getting to something you can just respond to, right? It's like vamping in a garage band. Well, now you can, with these tools, like let's say Wondercraft, you can very quickly, within minutes, all of us on this call could create 10 different versions of an ad for Oxford Road. And it's not that you're going to use any of those, but man, you shorten the path. You shorten the path so much with these tools that now we can react to those 10 and get to the deeper ideas and make those, human and emotional connections, which I do believe humans still do and do excellently. But what the AI does is it does a lot of the grunt work that was so difficult, which is like, okay, just let's all come up with 300 ideas about how we could market this. Well, for us to do that, that's going to take an hour or two. The AI does it really quick. And then what I find is about 5 to 10% of that is stuff that you're going to keep moving further down the line. So I like that piece. And the other piece I like is that you can move it out of an idea to something you can press play on, particularly for folks that aren't in creative, that have a harder time imagining. And that's no criticism. You can now, it'll kind of sound like this. It's like, here, let me play you where we're headed. And then you can hear it. Oh, okay, cool. Respond and adjust.
I think within that, we got some really good blurbs that we're going to repurpose on LinkedIn because it's all about appropriation of content, right? Good stuff. Neal, do you feel better informed? Do you feel satisfied with Stu's answer?
Oh yeah, 100%. And he does a much better job trying to explain his position and
You
like
went
the
over my
emotion
head on a
effect.
couple of things, so I'm gonna have AI dumb him down.
No, but I think I think people have feared technology. When new
Yeah.
technology comes, like the first thing
Yeah.
is like, there's a fear factor, right? So,
Yeah.
and I
Exposure.
was trying to represent that, and I know I didn't do a very good job.
Are you guys past that fear factor? I'm still hanging on to some of it.
Depends on what aspect of it, but for the voices, yeah, I'm past it.
You're over it. Yeah, for the voices.
Yeah,
Well,
and I think I know we belabored this, but to me the real question is performance, performance, performance. And I think what's cool, and you're going to see this with all of the AI generated stuff, like you can see in the Wicked movie where they did a lot of practical props, is a premium's going to be put on the real thing, which is good for us because that's what audio is all about. And sure, there might be units where, oh, I can pay to have the host do it with this cloned voice, and maybe that's even something that's where I will not be surprised to see. That's something if you're listening to da 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 networks, you're going to hear clone voices of our hosts. Da, 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 da. They'll disclaim it. It's fine. But if you want the real thing and you want them to integrate it into the show, it's going to drive up a price premium for that.
do you guys remember in San Diego when a local Zoo Crew radio group did a contest called Hold Your Wii for a Wii to win a gaming console, and then somebody died because and I don't mean to make light of this at all, but this really happened. Do you guys remember this a few years back? James is nodding his head. He was in the
Oh.
radio. This was a big deal, and it changed the policies and the way I think the whole industry thought about doing promotions and like when does it stop being fun and when are you putting your audience in harm's way? And one of my big predictions on this, whether or not it's 2025, is the more we start using it. I think first we're all curious and we're like, "Wow, this is cool! Look what we're able to do that we weren't able to do before." And then all of a sudden, we're going to have inventory. We're going to start getting impressions and classifying it as a new type of vehicle to purchase. And then it's going to start taking money, and then it's going to take money away from other buckets where people are getting money. And as soon as we start, moving money from X to Y for this stuff, and it starts actually getting any kind of scale and making an impact in the market, I think that's when you're going to start seeing people paying attention to when it gets it wrong and when there's errors. And the day you have somebody who's physically harmed in real life, because of something that was an accident based on AI creating content that wasn't really scrutinized before it got published. That's when I think there's going to be a backlash on all this. And I think for all of us, I think we can all agree that's probably a reasonable assumption that those types of things are going to happen as they're working out the kinks. And I think, and Conor, you reiterated this early in the subject, but I think we have to stay on guard, particularly in as kind of guardians of brands, that we recognize the opportunity, we see it, we're excited by that, we want to move toward it and support that, but we also have to stay very, very protective of what brands are putting their likeness around, and how that can get them exposed to things they've never even conceived before, because it's a whole new type of way, it is a whole new way to generate media content. So I just want to leave it with a cautionary note, because I think this is all beautiful and exciting in the future, but there's also new risks that are going to come with that. And I think on the marketing side, we need to be increasingly proactive and vigilant in trying to protect against those threats. So anyway, with that, Neal, I'm going to send it back over to you. Why don't you change the subject for us, and let's talk about ad load a little bit. What happened in 2024 with ad load?
My favorite subject. I'm first going to share a personal story.
Wow.
So we were driving to San Jose for Thanksgiving break, and we decided to listen to podcasts. And my wife hasn't listened to a lot of podcasts. And so we were listening to a series, and after a while, she said, "These ads are really starting to annoy me," because they're like the ad load was pretty high in the podcasts that we were listening to. And so she started skipping the ads. And I said, a little part of me inside is dying right now as you're skipping what I do. So certainly we have, ad load is increasing. I think we know that. It's an issue. Certainly was an issue for my wife. What we've seen this year, so Magellan AI, they do quarterly benchmark reports. I don't think they've released Q3 quite yet, but from Q1 to Q2, they saw about a 12% increase in ad load. Podscribe does benchmark reports. They find that performance decreases based on where your ad is in the pod. So if you're the first spot, you get like a 0.4% visitor rate. That drops to like 0.25 if you're the sixth spot in an ad pod. So if there's more advertising, we know it hurts performance. And then we did our own report, and this was led by Giles Martin with Podscribe, which really highlighted almost a linear relationship with the increasing number of ads in a podcast and the performance of those ads in the podcast. So, once you get past about 10% in ad load, it really, performance takes a hit. So this is something that we've really called attention to this year with our pod load report. I think I'm thankful that Magellan does their quarterly reports and shows, just how ad loads are inching up. One thing to think about is, in general, we're still pretty light in terms of advertising, but I don't think we ever want to get to the point where we are with terrestrial radio, where it's about 30% of ad time. So I think I want to talk about like what conversations people have had about ad load this year with the brands that they work with publishers. I feel like this is really making verification tools paramount in the industry, where if you're the sixth spot in a pod, you're going to want some kind of make good. So I think Miranda is probably closest to this, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd love to get her perspective.
Yep. So we had the benefit of receiving feedback from publishers in person at Podcast Movement. I think in general, there was a lot of interest in learning more. For most, it kind of solidified what we already knew and gave us a benchmark. There are publishers out there who have had lower ad loads, and they used it as sort of bragging rights. But ultimately, it's going to take a lot operationally, even for some publishers to implement our recommendations with the Oxford clock. And some publishers are just going to do their own thing anyway. On the buying front, we really leverage this data that we receive through verification to help kind of analyze performance trends and really provide evidence-based insights when negotiating with publishers. It helps us justify why we request or need certain CPMs. There are some publishers out there, even for host reads, like they're worth a $10 CPM, period, because the ad load is so heavy. So we really use it as an optimization and a negotiation lever. And it is widely used when considering new show recommendations and planning, but really in order to take this to the next step and for us to help impact change, I would love to see a collaboration with a publisher showing how from a revenue perspective, why the Oxford Road Clock makes sense.
And Miranda, I want to get clarification from you. So I know that when we published and we actually had the receipts on the impact, that became a more clear part of our negotiation process and conversation with our publisher partners, right?
Yeah.
But did you say some of them proactively took the data and started course correcting their clocks with it, or have we seen anybody change anything from a policy standpoint as a result of this?
Not yet, and I think part of that is again, like operationally, there's a lot that goes into, walking back specific ad load, especially with all of the inventory issues that publishers have been experiencing still due to the iOS update.
Well, I think Spotify listened and they went and got rid of all of their audio ads to just focus on the baked in, right? So that had to have some effect.
And maybe a few other reasons,
Conor, I want to put you on the spot
Mm.
because, for the first half of the year, we were kind of cooking this thing up. And I think, one of the things that's so interesting going through this process with you and the V1 team is just seeing how much similarity there is in what we're experiencing and what we want, what frustrates us. I don't know what you've been seeing this year or what it was like on your side, because we really weren't talking when we started putting out data around pod load. But can you share a little bit about how you guys have been thinking about it and engaging with it from the other side of the fence?
Yeah, I mean, I think ad load is the topic of the day, but we've seen this, we've seen this progression of ad unit change, impact on performance. What do we do now? Early on, it was the move from embedded reads to DAI. And then it was, frequency capping, and we're seeing certain networks overserve delivery, to 50% of the delivery goes to 5% of the audience, and challenges with that 3 or 4 years ago. And so I think where we are so aligned, and I think where we can be, like a good mouthpiece for the industry, is we have a lot of the performance data and we've seen it historically, right? We stopped buying networks because they don't work. And ad load is one of those things that if there's too much ad load and your ad's buried in the pod, the ads aren't going to perform. And I think what we're always trying to balance here is how do we give the right information to a publisher, and you guys are doing a great job of this, in terms of how do we help these shows make more revenue, right? But not do it at the expense of advertiser performance. Because if we just sit back and say we only want one ad in every podcast because it's going to have the best engagement, then less advertisers are going to have an opportunity, and eventually podcasts are going to go away, right? Because if people aren't making money from them, then, so that's the flip side that I think we have to always understand and balance, is people need to get paid for their work. I think we just need to be responsible about the fact that I think what's unique to this media that we've all been learning over the last 10 years is the engagement is so strong, which is incredible from an advertiser perspective, but like you have to be very careful about how you roll out ads as a result of that.
I think on that point, that's a really good segue here, is because my point of view is that even to have the sixth spot in a stat is scary. Like there should never be 6 spots in a mid-roll, which is crazy. But what some of the podcasts I listen to, it infuriates me when I hear like a commercial, like as if you would hear on the radio, that has nothing to do. It's just gets inserted, and it's the fast talk, and it's the lawyer speak or the car sales speak and all that at the end. And I know that we always try to save the live reads here at Oxford Road, but maybe if that's not going anywhere, we can at least save the host read placement, because in my gut, that's a huge turnoff. And I used to never skip podcast ads, and now on the shows that I listen to, I skip them now because It's just a commercial that runs. If it was the host or the producer that opened their mic and was talking about a product, I'd probably listen. And then maybe when the other commercial comes on, it's just there. But I just have a feeling some of these other brands and the networks who are allowing it are ruining the experience for the user, because now it's just commercials instead of host reads or endorsements or the same voice in the native tone of the podcast delivering that message. And I feel like that's really kind of a bad user experience now, as Neal's wife can attest to.
Well, yeah, and related to that, I know for on a creative front, we do a lot of analysis of the spot breaks. And it's like I've been challenged with this idea of the mid-roll, because it's like, which one? Are we talking about mid-roll 1, mid-roll 2, mid-roll 3, mid-roll 4? Because, many shows, that's the way it goes now. We used to look at the pre-roll, the mid-roll, and the post-roll, but now you've got to be specific about which mid-roll. And then, like you're saying, where are you in that mid-roll? And what I'm hearing more of, just as we're sharing personal stories, I was listening and it's like I hear a Merrill investing ad, boom, Fidelity investing ad right after it, So it's like it's getting cluttered, definitely from an experiential standpoint.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting about podcasting is, and I think again, this is where publishers need to be smart about it, but there's no clock, right? So it's not like radio where you have to kind of fit into this set ecosystem. So you can get carried away with it, to your point, Stu. If you're not careful, you can see some blowback.
Well, and it's just so much easier to add load than it is to peel it back, once you have that inventory. And that's why we want to make some noise about it as early as possible, because some publishers that we know have already kind of eaten the forbidden fruit. They crossed the line, and now it's going to be 10 times harder for them to backtrack on it. And we in our template, like, we weren't expecting like, oh, everybody's going to adopt the Oxford clock because we called it that or whatever, but it was simply to say, here's a model you could use as an example to show that there should be a deliberate balance between produced ads and host ads, and that there should be a limit, but with an acknowledgement that we know they need to maximize their yield. We know they need to get as much revenue as possible per second. But if you can structure it properly, I believe that the value of a low ad load, even if half the ad units are host read, you're going to be able to make up for the clutter and the low value you get for that. But I think, the dirty little secret with all this, and I'll give Neal last word before we move on. But, I think the dirty little secret is that if you're publisher or content creator, and your audience or your advertiser community consists of large brands that actually don't know how well the ads perform in real life, which we see a lot of, then they're going to be less likely to complain if they're one of 20 sponsors, or if 4 of their ads happen to show up just accidentally in the same episode. It's not going to have the same impact because it's not going to crush their performance, because they're not necessarily actually measuring performance. And so I think a lot of publishers are saying, why screw around with the Oxford Roads and the Veritones and the clients that are going to be conscious of ROAS and CPA? Why not just sell it to big brand agencies that are never going to check us? And it's how many ads can we sell, even though they know that the value of that inventory may be lower on a CPM basis, they'll make it up in volume. And that's what we're fighting against with a lot of these. That's what's really hard about this issue.
That might kind of be relevant to my perspective, because I'm a little bit different from James. And I think that when you come into podcasting, probably makes a difference. If you've been listening to podcasting for 5-10 years and it was just the baked in host read ads, like that was your life. I'm newer to listening, so I don't necessarily mind the commercially inserted ads that are not host read. That doesn't bother me if they're well produced. What bothers me is if there's like 20% of the ad time or 30% of the ad time of a podcast I'm listening to is advertising. Or if I'm listening to a series of podcasts and I'm hearing the same ad just repeated and repeated and repeated, and that happens. I've listened to one podcast and it's literally it opens with the same ad every time, and I'm like, okay, I've heard it now 5 times in a row. I don't need to hear that ad anymore.
Agreed. Have you ever heard of any of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could go on, and we could go on so much further now that we're joining forces with our friends at Veritone One. We have created the world's largest specialist agency in audio and in podcasting. Nobody's ever done anything like this before, and it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved. What we do at this agency is we offer comprehensive services for brands that are looking to break out and be successful in this space. We call you the chief audio officer because we believe that what you need requires real specialist work. And the way that we approach it includes proprietary methods in media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights. We have a proprietary process called Audiolytics, which is our trademark method for creative development that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Audio isn't just the work that we do, it truly is our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. And that's why we're the leaders in brand safety and suitability, as well as in volume in the space. We try to provide solutions that ensure that your ad buys align your values that you have as a brand with your business metrics that you need to be successful. This stuff is hard, but we're here to make it a little bit easier for you. And if you're a chief audio officer seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, please get in touch with us. Do the right thing. Go to oxfordroad.com. And if you're passionate about audio, if you're strategic, if you're relentless, and you're looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as an agent of influence. Send us your resume through our website, oxfordroad.com. We made it really easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, and be sure to mention that you heard about us right here on the Media Roundtable podcast, because attribution is important. Thanks, everybody. You know, I think for anybody that hasn't downloaded it yet, do go to oxfordroad.com and download our Podload report. We will be updating it periodically, but you know, just here's what it includes. It includes the correlation between number of ad units in a program and the impact that an advertiser sees in their performance. And that led us to propose a template, which you see at the end of the paper, basically says, here's how we think a clock should be structured. And it's basically, you've got a live read and a produced ad back to back up top. And then you got 2 breaks, kind of 2 mid rolls, and early, 15 minutes in, 45 minutes in, or, there's different ways you can do it. 2 60s, one that's for lives and one that's for produced. And those 60s could be 2 30s, 4 15s, whatever, but that's inventory so that basically an advertiser, a brand, and a consumer are never more than 60 seconds away from the voice of the host of the show. And we believe that if you can keep it tight so that they don't have to be out listening to the 3rd minute of advertising that isn't in the host's voice, you're going to have better retention of listenership, higher engagement, and you're going to have certainly a better ROI and a happier customer while running the maximum number of units you can run, so you can get as much revenue as possible without having to sacrifice too much on that front. So it's a balance that we put out there. Go ahead and download it. It's free. Take a look. Let us know what you think. Okay, Miranda.
Yes.
You've been all around the world in 2024. You and Stephen and a handful of others, I think, have gone the extra mile to really, break down the barriers that have, limited a lot of an advertiser's ability to access this channel just to the US. Talk to us about what's changed. And, I know you've gone as deep as anybody dealing with all manner of time zones to move this business ahead.
Yeah, so just to kind of take it a couple of steps back, so we can also talk about just implications for brands in 2025. This year, there was a lot of coverage around the global podcast boom, with listenership projected to reach over 500 million by the end of this year. So that's almost a 10% increase. And that growth was really fueled by not just increasing content, but internet accessibility and smartphone adoption in major markets outside of the US. So some of the sort of standout headlines include Latin America has the highest growth rate, and they are actually expected to surpass North American listenership in 2025. We saw nearly half the population in the UK tune into podcasts weekly. Australians have officially surpassed the US in terms of percentage of people listening to a podcast in the last month, and just huge growth consumption in MENA in particular, where they have the highest proportion of heavy podcast listeners. And so what all of this means is that there's more opportunity for brands. And even though the spend is still small, they are starting to wake up. Revenue this year globally is expected to increase 16% year over year, increasing to 4 billion. And the market is only expected to grow to 5 billion by 2027. So if you are a global brand, now is the time to start planning audio worldwide. And I would strongly recommend investing in resources and tools, if you don't have an agency to do so, to address the nuance and specialization of each and every individual market. They are all so different. Some are more developed than others. But in general, what we are seeing is just that international publishers are very operationalized from a digital audio perspective. Best practices, they don't really exist. It's not really turnkey for performance advertisers. Even to set up a pixel or include a call to action can be challenging. It takes lots of conversations and workarounds. And so we are very much in the foundational phase. There's still a lot of education that needs to happen on a publisher by publisher, market by market level. And I'm really proud that Oxford Road is paving the way and doing a lot of the heavy lifting here so that the brands we work with can expand on the magic of podcasts on a global scale.
So Miranda, a couple follow-up questions here. Just one is sizing the market. So the way I have thought about this is I've seen some of the research come back is that basically, if you just double the US market in broad strokes, now you have the global market. Is that a kind of a accurate enough shorthand for how to think about the size?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's from a revenue standpoint in terms of how many advertising dollars are spent. But in terms of consumption, you're throwing out some big numbers, and I want to clarify a little bit about what they mean. So when we say that Latin America is going to exceed the US in listeners, so that means the number of humans tuning in all of Latin America, so like a cum in radio number, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
And so what percentage of the global listenership do we think is the US? If it's about 50-50 on a dollar here is a dollar outside of here, how does that work with the listenership? And Neal, feel free to chime in, or anybody that has some approximation of this. Do we know?
I know that the US is about 30% of the population, using some standardized stats here, listens to podcasts, but I think we'd have to do some quick math here to figure out an estimate.
We can come back to that, but it's important. And I think what my assumption is from what I've seen, and I think what you guys are saying, and feel free to check me in real time, but it seems like there are more listeners than dollars, or more consumers or time spent with the media than revenue. In other words, it's because it's a larger audience and less monetized, the value is actually somewhat higher for that reason, is what I'm kind of driving at.
That's right. Yes. And
Yeah.
I would actually argue, we just met with ENTA's International Trade Organization. We met with over 40 different publishers from all different countries. I would say they are seeing the same problem that we see in audio in general in the US, where there is a gap between consumption and dollar spent.
And Miranda, the other thing you're talking about, you talked about it generally, and I want to ask you to talk about it specifically because it's like, part of the argument for why you do these channels, why do we have a chief audio officer club? Why do we do a podcast about podcasting for podcast advertisers, right? Because it's harder than the others, right? And what I hear you saying is not only is podcast advertising harder than the other channels, but international podcasting is even harder than regular US podcasting, right? So it's kind of hard times hard. And I'd love to hear what are some of the specific examples of how that plays out when you're saying they need extra tools or extra research, right? Like, what do you hit your head on, or what should an advertiser expect they're going to run into if they want to expand internationally?
So two big ones. The first is pixel tracking, is a huge challenge. Like we have conversations with, in some of these markets, like they're the biggest audio publisher. And, we go and we say, okay, now we need to set up a pixel for attribution purposes. And they don't know, they have no clue what we're talking about, right? So it's educating them on why it's important and then having those follow-up conversations and helping kind of guide them on the execution. And even in some cases, again, it takes convincing, and oftentimes we've had to, say, hey, okay, we're going to walk away from the business if you can't do it, and then they find a way. The other thing is just sometimes including a call to action or a vanity URL or a promo code in the URL and in the creative, particularly in Europe. They're very sensitive about call to actions in their creative. And part of it is like in general, they are very protective over the content. They care so much about the listener experience, so much so we didn't even touch about it here, but like the ad loads are significantly lower. When I'm on the phone with these publishers, it's like 3 ads max. They would never dream of going, above that number. So, I mean, there's the benefit of them, again, wanting to protect and preserve that listener experience, which we know is so important and plays into performance, but then can be challenging when we're looking to set up campaigns for performance advertisers in these markets.
And there's just so much nuance, like you bring up with the vanity URLs. We can take for granted here in the United States, audio has always been commercial and based on commercials, right? That's not the case in every country in the world. So it's knowing thy audience, and with your team, Miranda, as we built out creative resources around the world now, that part is super critical as well. I was just speaking with some other creatives, and the level of work that we go to make sure that we're creating is how we talk about it, that it's not just translating it from one language to another. It's even like, learning a little bit about the history of the medium in that country. What are they accustomed to? And even if they do use vanity URLs or what have you, how do they typically do it? What is going to sound correct in that context? Like that is super critical, not just getting the language right, but even, what part of France are we doing? Broadcast French? Right. Are we gonna, what if we break it out and we make sure we kind of do a Southern Germany one and we do a Northern Germany one, because those are still super distinct. Whatever it is, that's really critical as you go international, that you have a lot of respect for that. And even like Canada so often gets just treated as the 51st state, and nobody even changes their creative. And it's like, hey, it's another country, so like there's we've got to take a close look when it comes to creative, even as we're going international, that we're not just exporting what we do here and doing it exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Don't forget that part of that country speaks French too.
Yeah, we.
That's a whole other thing, Neal. Just a supporting thought on that, Stu. We did an ad with Real Doctors, Fake Friends, which is an iHeart podcast. And we were buying it in Australia for a VPN client. And we did the first campaign and it was fine. And then we changed the creative. It was like, hey, Australia, because there's nuance with why Australians use VPNs versus Americans. Even just from a product standpoint, actually, why you use it can be different in some ways. And so really calling it out, it was, off the charts, significantly better. And so I think the challenge sometimes is finding a show that's large enough to do that with, but it remains the same, that I think localized creative is definitely king.
Yeah, no question.
Well, yeah, that's that, and that opens up the whole, a million ads and everybody that does the, the customized to audience at scale technology. What is the incremental value? Sounds like it was significant in that instance. And, I think we're all trying to figure out what's the maximum value that you can derive from customizing to every individual market. And everybody likes to talk about, the rain boots and the umbrellas based on the weather, but like finding the practical applications is not always so obvious, but it's good to hear, at least even anecdotally, where you really saw that make a profound impact. And I mean, look, live performers have been doing this forever. They do something to show the audience that they care about that specific city, right, when they tour. And there's a reason they do that, right? So we should probably be looking at it the same way in our marketing. Okay, moving on from this one, just because we have so much to talk about. At this point, it's a bit of a duet here between Neal and Conor, talking about celebrity podcasts and the big deals. So, Neal, I'll give you first word on this one.
Well, it's a duet, and I think that there may be some misconception that we have differing opinions.
Oh, are we going to actually have some debate here on the Media Roundtable?
No.
I
think that I think there's just a misperception, because I think that we talk about celebrity podcasts, and they're really celebrity podcasters. So these are like the cream of the crop in podcasting, which have been getting the big deals. So you go back a couple of years, a few years ago, it was people getting thrown money at them that were celebrities, like, who didn't have a podcast. Yeah, I mean, we know that the Obamas, for instance, is the classic example. Like, throw money at them, of course they'll be successful. That's not happening anymore. It's really the people that have established audiences that are getting the big deals. So I think that that's how I view it. I view it as big deals have returned to podcasting, but they're different than they were a couple of years ago. It's really to those proven people from a talent perspective that have audiences that publishers want in their stable to grow their podcasting base.
Yeah. And that was exactly my point. I think where I was getting hung up on the back and forth originally was calling it a celebrity podcast, because I think you can make the argument that Joe Rogan is a podcaster, not a celebrity podcaster. So Jason Bateman and the Smartless crew, are they more podcasters now, not celebrities? Sure. I mean, so I think they are, the point being, the shows that are getting the money are proven podcasts, not outsiders coming in, just trying to leverage their celebrity to, manufacture an audience, essentially.
Yeah, and maybe I slightly differ, where they are podcasters, but they become bona fide celebrities on the heels of their success in podcasting. Some of them, right?
Great. Yeah, that's even better. That's an Alex Cooper, I think, as an example, right?
Yeah. And and Joe Rogan too. I think he had his success on Fear Factor and other places, but he wasn't what he is now, right?
Exactly. And I think, just to further extend the point, I think we're kind of taking it a slightly different direction, but I think each of these deals, when you look at them individually, because there's five major deals that we saw, in 2024, there are specific reasons why each media company, made the deal with each show. I think when you break it down, right? SiriusXM, their platform is Talk. Howard is, I think his contract's up at the end of next year. So who is going to replace that for Sirius? I think the question with that deal is how SXM help their creators in video, because that is something that is very new to them, and it is not new, and it's certainly on the roadmap, and how audiences consume Smartless and Call Her Daddy and the Unwell Network. So that's going to be an interesting kind of rollout in terms of how Sirius SXM make their way into video through these creators or these big shows. I think if you look at the Spotify deal with Rogan, that seems like a no-brainer. That's a signal to the market that they're moving on from podcasting. So I think the big point to make on that deal was the non-exclusive nature, and that's sort of what we're seeing. We're going to see more of in the industry. I think, networks not having exclusive rights to the show for listening. I think that was proven to not really work. And then the Amazon New Heights and Dak Shepard deals. I think I think the video is the key to those deals. I think Amazon, with football, they see Travis Kelce as more of a celebrity, actually, I think, and doing more, trivia shows or whatever. But I think, and then Dak Shepard obviously comes from video. So I think those make sense from that standpoint to me. That was just kind of my quick take on those deals specifically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with Amazon, they want to keep their Prime subscribers, right? So getting that talent and company worth over $2 trillion can afford to spend money on podcasters that are going to bring new content to their Prime Video service and hopefully create new, and then spin off content from there. And I think, Dan, you probably called it first that I remember. You were like, Spotify's going to renew with Rogan. Just like, I feel like you said that, like, just like, Howard Stern was not going to go away from SXM when his deal came up, right? They needed him to stay in that family.
No, because if you're serious about the channel and, there's only so many, you basically, Rogan, Smartless, Call Her Daddy, maybe New Height. Like there's a short list of the giants that have, household name recognition. They're a mainstream phenomenon. They get referenced in all kinds of other media. And so I think where I come down on how I read this whole situation is I 100% agree where you guys have aligned in that the dumb money is gone. People got really excited. There was a bubble. They said, oh, there's a pandemic. We're all doing reactive stuff. So let's just chase every celebrity that's going to turn on their phone and start recording conversations with their friends, and the money will find it, right? We found out there's a limit to the value of that. And now these deals generally are being projected, based on real data and traction, and they've de-risked it by publisher. But I think there's probably a hidden thing going on. And I have no direct knowledge of this. I'm not in the room when they're making these deals. But my perception is that the publishers are also, especially the platforms, are going, well, there's a brand value, there's a street value to showing that we're serious about this channel. And I'll bet there's a premium on how that model gets valued based on just being able to make the statement that you own it. So I sort of felt like Spotify didn't really have a choice. Sirius, who knows what a premium they paid with a few of their marquee folks, just because they had to have them to show that they have them. But then if you're everybody else, don't compare yourself to them, right? Don't expect that you're going to get any of that. You're going to get a rev share. And, I think it just gets harder and harder. Like the number of people that can get rich being hired by a company for their podcast is like very, very not that big a market.
Well, the prices that they're putting out there, though, on some of these networks are a little hefty. So I think it's very interesting to see how the ad market responds to these. Like, great, just because you got, I'm not going to call anyone out, just some really big high name person to bring their podcast over to your network doesn't mean that everyone's going to be shelling out millions of dollars a quarter to be on it. I think they're going to want opportunities to see how it does. Will they stick with it? Will it look the same? Will you load it with ads? Will the content be different? There's a lot of different questions to ask there. And I've seen too, like, I don't think anyone can put their finger on it, but not all celebrity are created equal. I mean, you have some that take off and you wouldn't even probably call them a celebrity, maybe. And you have others like, I'll use like Jon Stewart, great TV late night host, great following there. He puts a podcast out and it's great content, but it's not top 10 or top 20. it's definitely there for a very niche
Yeah,
audience.
you can't just run a TV show as a podcast and expect that you're going to do great with it.
Right.
But I think on your point, James, I think maybe as an industry and an advertising community, we're undervaluing some of these shows, right? Like maybe they are worth millions of dollars, right? And I think that's where we need to do a better job of explaining with quantifiable metrics how large some of these programs and audiences are and how engaged these audiences are and why advertisers and politicians need to be in this media because this is where things are going. And so I think a leveling up of, we've always had small D2C advertisers, buying into podcasts, and that's awesome and that's great. And they've done a good job growing their businesses that way. But I think it's time for bigger brands to take note that this is where audiences in America are. And so as a group, I think we could do maybe a better job of helping kind of tell that story.
Here, and I think the debate will continue behind the scenes here because this is what we have to contend with every day, right? Assessing the value and, not being short-sighted as though everything's a direct response vehicle, but also not being flippant about the fact that just because it's big, it's necessarily a good investment. So the tension in that debate is everything. And I think, every brand should be having these debates, I think. So, all right, let's move on because we got a couple big ones, then we're going to try to do some rapid fire self-reflection. I am introducing our next big subject, which is the podcast election. I don't know if you guys heard anything about this, but there were these two people running for some government seat in the US, and there was a lot of money that went behind it, and a pretty good media hype cycle. Apparently the fate of democracy was on the ballot, and it's now or never. So that election took place. The candidate who was not leading in the polls ended up outperforming the numbers, and a lot of people were suggesting that surprise, surprise, Trump outperformed the polling, and many people drew a line of cause and effect between actually the candidates' presence on podcasts and the performance in the election. Now, look, the way I look at this stuff, I don't think that JFK beat Nixon just because Nixon was sweating in a debate on camera. Like, that was one factor, and there's a lot of different factors that aren't getting talked about when you're talking about that one, right? And same thing here. I don't think it hurt Trump that he and JD Vance both went on Rogan and that Kamala didn't. For whatever reasons, I think that was material, and it's interesting that there's kind of been this kind of merger of the MAGA movement and a lot of the cultural drivers behind, I think, the podcast movement in this kind of Elon world, where he's got a universe of other creators that are, whether or not they're libertarian or whatever you want to call them, they've kind of allied with Trump and created a lot of spaces in media where I think voters were hearing a different perspective from what they saw on the traditional channels. I think we know as performance marketers that if you want to advertise on traditional media with $1 versus some of the newer creator-based media that we deal in with $1, those impressions are going to work a lot harder dollar for dollar in the channels where we operate. So I wasn't surprised to see this help Trump. The fact that he was on Theo Vaughn, Lex Fridman, Logan Paul, Dan Bongino, and of course Rogan. You had JD Vance going on Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, Bill O'Reilly, New York Times. And then you had Harris going on a few of them. She was on Call Her Daddy, and she was talking to the Breakfast Club. But it didn't hit the same. And I think the consequences to this are massive in a few ways that I'll just lay out and let you guys respond to. One, we saw brands really staying away from political content in audio specifically. We saw them avoiding it like the plague leading in. And I think the brand safety concerns that we saw in the 2020 election were still alive this year. But what was interesting is you saw one, it didn't change the consumers because the listenership was up about 28% election over election in these programs. And so the consumers kept going there. The brands did not. But what the brands have all seen now is the impact of these channels demonstrated in a real world environment. And now they're starting to, I'm already seeing increased interest in some of these shows that were seen as controversial. Brands that were going, never get me off of that. Don't get me near anything political, anything conservative, anything like Rogan. Like there was a time when they were all persona non grata, and now there are brands that are starting to say, actually, we kind of want to be in there, right? So the marketplace is shifting, and I think some of that is following the success of the marketing campaign that the Trump group executed versus the Harris campaign, where they didn't push it as far. They relied more on traditional media. It didn't work as well. So I think the market is just following the success of the candidate that was not anticipated to win by such a wide margin. But then further, I think brands are saying, okay, we don't need to play it so safe anymore either. They're kind of going back to basics. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you see groups like Walmart, unwinding their DEI policies. And the same year that Elon Musk effectively eviscerated the global advertisers for responsible media, the GARM framework is dead because Musk decided that it was going to be dead and he had the power to do it. He killed the whole structure that the whole advertising industry was basing its decisions around. And so I think what you're seeing, this is my analysis and mine only. This is not a company analysis, and this doesn't have to be what anybody thinks other than me. But I think you saw a lot of reaction during the pandemic culturally and in media to different viewpoints, to different ways of thinking, and frankly, to different ways of public figures expressing decorum, where brands were saying, "Get me away from anything that doesn't feel safe and like the traditional media of the past." But then, we all have to acknowledge that Trump has been successful here, whether or not you love him or hate him. And I don't say this with any political view in the discussion, but he won and his methods won. And I think people are now saying, well, now that that's winning, we're going to react to that and we're going to lower our defenses a little bit. We're not going to be so protective. And I think that the way this affects advertisers is significant because all of a sudden, the media that they are willing to consider has expanded significantly just in the last few months. And their ways of monitoring, I think, is even degrading in that nobody's really even trying anymore. People don't want to deal with this, and they never found a good way to deal with it anyway. And so now they're kind of saying, well, for the next 4 years, all bets are off. So the importance of brand safety to most brands has diminished drastically. And as I wrap up here, I think, our view and our approach that we've taken as an agency isn't changing at all. Our view is that the marketplace was overreacting in what they were making ineligible for sponsorship. They were reacting to keywords and topics that were being seen as unsafe, and that they needed tools and resources to do this in a practical way so that they could responsibly manage what they do, but not have to say, we do left, we don't do right, or we avoid all politics. That was stupid. And we didn't agree with that to begin with. But what we want to preserve and continue to advocate for is a civility standard that does make brands aware of how hosts treat people that they disagree with, because that is the thing that correlates with future backlash. And it doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter the ways that the cultural or political winds are blowing. We need to protect advertisers from exposing themselves to being in the middle of a political food fight and a culture war all the time. And we're going to continue to advocate that brands use metrics that are practical and get at the spirit of a conversation, but not the letter of the law in the way that, we were kind of just all being hall monitors for a while. That's my rant.
And I think that's an excellent temperature check of what's going on with at least our clients. on the Oxford Road side right now is that I've had a number of clients as we've been beginning to present to them like, hey, listen, it's time to maybe start relooking at your political alignments because conservative or liberal hosts, they're not going anywhere. And in fact, you might argue, like we just said, this might have been the podcast election. And you'd be surprised how many clients are actually considering now. They still want to be balanced. I'll take some from the right and some from the left, but some clients who were never political talk are now looking into it a little bit more. I think because it's risen to the forefront of the conversation and maybe some of the turmoil is now over. The election is done. So now it's going to be, let's see what the next 4 years bring. But there is some welcoming of it back into the conversation, which is good to see.
Yeah, seeing very similar sentiment here, James. I think Nick Quah from Vulture wrote a great article about this that I think everyone should read. And it's not, I think the left was kind of screaming, "We need a Joe Rogan. We need our Joe Rogan," and that wasn't, spoiler alert. That's not the answer. I think you need to engage with audiences wherever they are with your message, and I think that's an important lesson for brands.
Here. Any last words on this?
Well, I think on that note, I mean, specifically with Joe Rogan, he invited Harris to be on his podcast. They just couldn't make it work. And I think in retrospect, I'm sure her campaign is like, yeah, we probably should have gone to Austin, Texas and sat down with him. And he was like, I just want to have a conversation with her. I mean, I think that the environments that they were in were pretty safe for the candidates. They weren't being grilled to the extent. I mean, it wasn't sitting down with 60 Minutes and getting that type of an interview. It was more of a conversation and being able to have an extended conversation, which you just can't do in television. So I mean, it really, I think there is the benefit of being able to have that extended time and to kind of have conversation, questions, and follow-up questions. But it was also a pretty safe environment, I think, for both candidates to be in.
Yeah, and those are the couple observations I have on it is one, long form, the time of long form. I think that, as they say, the world's most compelling ideology is success. So this is good. It bodes well for podcasting. And Mike Cesario, the CEO and founder at Liquid Death, had posted the day after the election. It's just the thing that we're all talking about here is just being tuned in to culture, where people are active and how they're engaging. And this bodes very well in podcasting of going, this is a format that people engage with heavily. And now there's an incredible case study to point to.
Yeah, I remember in 2008 after the Obama election, the storyline was better media targeting. I don't know if you guys remember but that was the narrative.
Completely. He was the digital guy. Like he figured it out. He went on to social and nobody had ever really done it that way. Right.
Yep.
But but it's interesting. It's not just that it's new. It's that they're going somewhere for a type of conversation they haven't been able to get, for a lens they haven't been able to get. And the number of people that are like, well, did you listen to the interview with so-and-so? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, then you don't even know the candidate. Well, there might be truth in that because we get so many sound bites and so many of other people's perspectives. Just to hear somebody explain themselves for an hour is a different type of experience. And great argument for the importance of the channel and why we need to preserve the kind of open nature of it. Conor, we've had such a great time covering these other topics. Can you try to take us through what's been happening with the rise of video? Because I don't think you can talk about 2024 without this.
I mean, the reality is that the stats show that YouTube is, the largest place where people consume their podcasts at 31% versus Spotify's 27%. So just take a minute, everybody, and that's a fact. 31%. It's the largest place where people consume podcasts. I think to the core audio folks message, that leaves 42% with Apple and Spotify and then some others. So over half is still going to be audio only, so it's still audio only is still a big chunk. But this convergence of audio and video is very real, and I think YouTube specifically is the key here with their platform having it's massive, right? It's just a lot of people are on YouTube for one, so that's just like you're gonna get audiences there. I think they have a very solid creator and established creator revenue platform that keeps people on the platform and wanting to be on the platform. And then discovery obviously is going to be the best, and recommending content to audiences. So I think that's sort of like the high level points to make on video and YouTube specifically. But any thoughts or questions on that, or
I
reactions?
agree with you. I mean, I don't think it's going anywhere. Obviously, it's not, but I'm of the camp that not every podcast needs a video. And I know that some publishers out there are trying to incentivize all the creators by uploading videos too. But like the two shows I listen to, one just the guy talking into a microphone for an hour
Yeah.
talking music. I don't need to see him. It's fine. I enjoy not seeing him and listening to the clips that he plays. But I think that also people are tuning in to the video, back to the celebrity portion, is because they're treating it as such. Like it's a talk show, or it's like a TMZ style show, or it's a weekly installment of their favorite. It replaces their favorite primetime programming now. So I do think that those are really important to have video, but I do think that audio only still has a place.
Yeah, and I think that as well with I think of audio fiction and audio books, for instance, is another one where there's not necessarily, maybe the video component is the cover art, does that, because that then all of a sudden you've turned, does the companion podcast to Rebel Moon, Chow or whatever it was called, does that are they going to produce a Netflix show to go with that too? Visuals? No, the whole point is that's an auditory experience and you watch the show. So, and that to me is how it resolves in my head, is like, well, there will be some that the video piece is just almost like those ambient channels that you can turn on.
Yeah, I think the message is also, if you can, if a video format fits, then that's great, and
Right.
people, that works. So I think what we're seeing a trend in with new shows, again, new shows that can support video. Tucker Carlson, as an example, recently launched a show in 2024 that's very large, top 10 podcast, launched it on audio only apps, YouTube, and X. And I think that's the model that we're seeing. I think there's some news about Khloe Kardashian releasing a podcast this next, in 2025, doing a 24-hour exclusive on X. I think it's X's long form strategy is super interesting to me, and what we'll see there, because we haven't historically seen long form engagement on X. Some of the metrics that I've seen from shows are something like, only 1% of the audience gets through 25% of the video. So as an ad agency, we do not monetize or try to, monetize X right now. We leave it as like a bonus pool of impressions, but I think we're going to see that evolve in 25.
Well, and especially now that, frankly, Elon is co-president, I think people are now saying, well, we're going to have to play ball here. Whereas there was so much resistance to brands getting near that platform. And I think you're going to see a lot of people saying, all right, fine, we'll make it work. So it creates a lot of opportunities. Any other final last words on the video front?
I would just mention there was I thought it was and forgive me because I can't remember who the interviewee was, but in the Podcast Business Journal last Friday, there was an interview, and for the person who was being interviewed specifically called out interview podcasts as particularly compelling for video, where people want to see the interview, like the person interviewing and the person being interviewed. So I thought that was interesting. And then and Tom Webster had a interesting perspective as well. I think is a little bit like the world's not falling, not everything's going to video. People still primarily consume podcasts in audio format. I'm probably doing a very bad job paraphrasing what he was saying, but it was kind of like take a chill out a little bit. It's not the end of the world. And like Spotify making their announcements, we have 250,000 podcasts. Now it's up to 100,000 video podcasts, but you compare that to YouTube and it's billions and billions of videos. So it's like, it sounds like a lot, but it's a fraction of what they are.
Totally agree with that. And I think Tom's research points to some good stats about audio that I was trying to make in the beginning, but not as good as Tom, obviously. I think jumping off something you said, Neal, about being, maybe a newer podcast listener and hearing ads, ad interruptions being part of your experience. One thing from an advertiser perspective is understanding how these, video podcasts will have ads from YouTube pop up and interrupt the show, but people who watch YouTube are used to that. So, it's just interesting how that's all going to play out and how we as an ad agency try to help navigate that for our clients. And maybe do we play into it to get extension buys on video ads to reach the same audiences and retarget people and all those things I think are going to be growth areas for us in 2025.
Totally agree. And we went deep on this a couple of weeks ago with James Cridlin, who has been a very clear advocate for, preserving podcasting as an audio native channel, right? And, where I shake out on this issue is, as a performance marketer, I know there's a benefit to the say effect, to when you can not just say something to an audience member, but also show them. Your ad may get a higher response rate, and that means video is important, right? Also, we just can observe that content visually is a lot easier to manufacture than it used to be. And there will be digital capabilities, there already are, and things that can create a dynamic video experience just in an automated way without the creator having to lift a finger, right? So it's all going to be capable, but I think, anybody that tries to change what the audience wants is crazy. And we see publishers making new systems and new rules every 6 months or whatever, and we get the dictate and we adapt around it, right? But what everybody's going to figure out eventually is that a lot of consumers want to take in this type of media without looking at it, or they want the option to enjoy it the same without looking at it. And sometimes they might want to look at it. James effectively mentioned, what is this industry without serial, and what is serial if it has to have video? It didn't happen, right? So there is a place for audio only content or content that doesn't require video, but we're also foolish if we think that it's not going to be a both and most of the time. And I think our job is to make sure that the essence of what drives performance for an advertiser, but value for an audience member, is the fact that this channel, whether it's got pictures or not, is something you can listen to at your convenience. It's on demand, and that may be even more significant than whether it's audio or visual only, and that the type of conversation isn't limited in the ways that your TikTok feed or your TV sound bites limit how much you can actually dig into a conversation. And we can preserve that without having to worry about whether or not there's a camera or not. Everything else is just details and how we execute. So that's kind of how I'm looking at the world. And this is a conversation that's going to continue not only into 2025, but beyond. And we're going to have to wrap this episode for today. I just want to say thank you to this panel: Conor, Miranda, Stu, James, Neal. You guys, this has been a great look back. We have more to discuss as we go along, but this podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road and Veritone One, where we want you to succeed in audio and use your influence for good. Go to oxfordroad.com, check out our newsletter, The Influencer. Send us feedback, info@mediaroundtable.com. Listen to the one Stu does called Ad Infinitum, all about creative. Special thanks to Caitlin, Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane Everett, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly. Okay, everybody? Thanks.